because we've got two wonderful guests, and we're talking about the subject of youth. I'm the senior pastor of New Direction Church, Pastor Kenneth E. Sullivan Jr., and I have with me today Pastor Corey Duncan, the youth pastor at New Beginnings Fellowship Church, and also Terrance Bridges, the youth pastor at Eastern Star Church. Welcome again, Corey. Welcome again to you, Pastor Terrance. So good to have you. You know, before we let into this segment, Pastor Duncan and I, we've discussed some of the challenges we face with our youth, and we've talked about, you know, examples that they need to have, and we explained to the audience how some of these issues that we're facing, I believe, comes as a direct result of them not having the proper examples or the proper exposure to the things of God. You know, we talked about youth violence, we talk about drug abuse, we talk about low self-esteem and identity and all those kinds of things. What would you say are some of the issues as a youth pastor, some of the things maybe that you're experiencing and some of the things that you're seeing that the church can really address and needs to address as it relates to our youth immediately in the church, but then our community in a broader context?
I think one of the things that is happening that you speak about in regards to reaching our young people and giving them that example and giving them that model is directly in line with what my passion and my research has been from an educational perspective as well. And in the urban north environment, a lot of our young people have not had the experience of true, genuine relationship with people. We've been wanting to recruit them to churches, we've wanted to recruit them to programs, we wanted to recruit them to events. But more so than being recruited to a cause, they want to be recruited because somebody cares, because somebody loves them, because somebody is interested in them, because somebody is willing to make the investment in them as an individual and as a person. So a lot of times I think our young people are in a lot of ways sick and tired of programming for them and church services for them. They want that genuine relationship. And that's key. I mean, Paul talked about it when he was talking to his son in the ministry, Timothy. He talked to him about the faith that he first saw in his grandmother Lois and his mother Eunice, and that he had seen in him. But all of that faith in terms of exposure that Pastor Duncan talked about earlier, all of that came out of relationship. And that's key, I think, for our young people now, is developing that relationship with key individuals in the church.
Yeah, you know, as you begin to share about that being the most important thing that our young people need is the relationship, and them having that personal relationship and discipleship, I begin to think, how can we possibly do that in an age where, you know, they're texting, they're Instagramming, they're emailing, you know, where so much of our interaction today is not personal. You know, how do we develop that personal relationship with them? And, you know, one of the things that I think is very important for us to remember and realize, we are in a context where the family has completely changed in terms of the traditional family, where you had people took for granted that your dad would come home in the evening and that he would be an example, that he would go to work, that your mom didn't have to work 2 and 3 jobs just to provide for you. So I think that some of our children, in the 80s we called them latchkey kids. You had to come in and let yourself in because your mother and father hadn't got off work yet. And so you were one of those. Yeah, we all had to deal with that. I mean, I think that's just a part of it. And you begin to see that change. From what we talked about earlier with Leave It to Beaver and kind of some of the traditional settings. And so I think that you're absolutely right, where it is relationship they're looking for. How do we begin to build those relationships? Certainly we know it takes time. It takes time to build relationships, and you have to take out time to listen to our young people. I think one of the biggest issues as well in terms of generational communication issues is that you have young people who are crying out in so many different ways. I think some of the suicides rates that we see, that's them crying out. I think the drug abuse, to some degree, it's them crying out. I think that some of the violence that we see is that they're crying out. How do we get the time, find the time to set in place? Because we do know it does take some programming to be able to have things set in place, to be able to have individuals who mentor, who volunteer. So maybe what are some tips that you could give even to some churches? There's some pastors who are watching us, who are listening. there's some community leaders. There's some people who really want to do some good in their community, and they just need some tips. They need to understand from a younger person's perspective, how do you really reach them and build those relationships? And maybe what are some things they can implement in their church, in their neighborhood, that can really reach them and build those kind of relationships?
I think that's a good question, Pastor Sullivan, because a lot of times, even in our mindset as a culture, we think in terms of programs and really shifting our mindset